There are many ways to frame a piece of art, but if we speak generally, we can usually place framing into one of two categories. It's either placed directly into the frame with the surface open to the elements, or sandwiched between backing board and a mat with a glass or acrylic protective cover called glazing. There are other framing methods, but these are the two primary forms. Let's discuss some of the key parts of these frames, and then we'll talk about framing according to the type of painting support. We'll begin by discussing typical framing for works on paper or flat artwork. Often, artists will frame this kind of work with what's called a mat. Mats are made of archival paper material and surround the artwork image like a frame around a window. In fact, the opening is called the mat window. A mat can overlap the painting image a little or leave some white space around the edge. The role of a mat is fourfold. It's there to separate the art from the glass or acrylic sheet. It's there to draw the eye to the painting. It's also there to hide adhesives and the edge of the artwork sometimes, and generally to enhance the painting. It's basically a thin archival board made from cotton or linen fiber that, as we said, surrounds the painting image within the frame. They tend to be beveled at the opening in order to soften the transition between the painting image and the mat. Mats can be single layer or multiple layer. Sometimes small amounts of the bottom mat layer are exposed. These small reveals offer artists the ability to play with accent colors without overwhelming the piece, if color is needed. Your selection of a color for your mat is ultimately a matter of personal taste, but normally the mats are light in value and either pick up a color in the painting or are a form of white or off-white. Most art exhibitions prefer or even require a white or a neutral light mat so that they have continuity in the show. The average mat thickness is what is referred to as a 4-ply, which is about 1/16 of an inch, or sometimes it's labeled as, in this case, 50 to 60 points. There are also thicker versions. There's a 6 or an 8-ply. I personally prefer the thicker mats. I think it looks a little more elegant. When selecting a mat and frame, experts recommend choosing your frame first and then figure out the mat that would work best with the painting in the frame. A standard rule is that the mat should be twice the width of the frame. It's also suggested not to use a mat under 2 inches in width. However, done carefully, you can certainly break this rule. For example, look at this frame set. In this case, the mat is thinner than the frame, but it's quite beautiful, isn't it? So I would suggest, as usual, that you use these rules as guidelines, knowing that ultimately the choice is very individual. In fact, sometimes smaller paintings are actually given extra wide mats for a contemporary chic look. And of course, there are always exceptions. Some people follow the rule that the smaller the image, the larger the mat. But perhaps the best thing to do is to explore an art museum, an art exhibit, or even look online and see what type of mat and frame combinations appeal most to you. It'll also depend on your painting style. Mats are sometimes given what is called a weighted bottom. This refers to when a mat has a little extra bulk or width on the bottom border in order to figuratively offer a unique sense of balance. Some experts believe it comes from the time when paintings were hung above the eye as part of a salon exhibition. They would weight the bottom to compensate visually. That's a theory anyway. Whether this is true or not, it's still a matting practice that you'll see today. So let's take a look at how framed works using mats are normally layered. Our sandwich. Here you can see the mounting board. The flat artwork, which we can't actually see, would be next. Then you have your mat, and then you have your glass, and then your frame. Now, rabbits vary in size, so you have to be careful. If you do select a frame with a deeper rabbit, you often just have to add a second piece of mounting board on the bottom. Now, sometimes glazed paintings don't have a mat, but they'll still need airflow, so you would use what are called spacers instead, like you see here. Now, they would be placed closer to the edge so that they would hide under the rabbit and out of view. It's another option. The frame supports this set as well. Sometimes works on canvas or panel are framed with what is called a liner. This is an area of fabric, usually linen, that functions a lot like a mat. You'll most often see these used with oil paintings. It's typically about an inch or so wide, not usually more than 2 inches, and it sits on the inner edge of a frame. Like a mat, it's meant to soften the piece against the frame, providing a visual bridge, and typically it's light or neutral in color. There are other kinds of framing accents out there, but I would be careful if implementing them, especially if your work is going to be in a show, because you don't want to make your piece overly ornate, usually. A mounting board is used when framing with a mat. This is a solid surface that sits behind the flat artwork, the other side of the bread in a sandwich, so to speak. If you picture our sandwich, with the glazing on top and then the painting, this is the bottom piece of bread. If your artwork is on a flexible surface like paper or fabric, not including canvas stretched over stretcher bars, it'll need a firm surface to sit on within the frame. It's not usually visible, but there are some framing methods where it does show. It should absolutely be archival, since your entire work will touch it. It's going to sit right on top. And it's normally neutral as far as color. You certainly wouldn't want a color influence to show behind your work. It's also helpful if it's lightweight in order to save some weight in your framing. Some materials used for this purpose are foam board, if it's archival, gator foam, and mounting board, which is similar to mat board. Glazing refers to either a glass or acrylic sheet that sits in the frame and protects the artwork from the elements. It's our top piece of bread in the sandwich. It should never touch the painting, so mat board or spacers will be needed. Today, glazing also protects the piece from UV damage that can happen when it's exposed to too much natural light or a lighting fixture with UV. But you have to purposely request UV filtering glass or acrylic, and I recommend you do this. Artwork these days is not as vulnerable because of technology advancements in our supplies, but it's always a best practice, and it'll be a helpful selling feature too. If you have the extra money to spend, I recommend museum-grade UV filtering glass or acrylic. The way the glass is glazed to offer this protection gives the piece an especially crisp, clear, yet protective cover. Sometimes the less expensive versions can alter the color of your painting just a little bit. So if you can afford it, I would go with museum grade. There's almost no reflection, and colors are more accurate to the viewer. It's sometimes twice the price, but if color accuracy is important to you and a piece is meant for an important show, it's worth the investment. Whether you use glass or acrylic is up to you, unless a show specifies a material, or if you're shipping the piece. If you're shipping a framed painting, acrylic sheet is recommended because it's much less prone to shatter. Are there drawbacks to either? Yes. Glass is fairly heavy, and as I said, it can shatter if it's hit. But acrylic sometimes develops a slight warp, and it scratches very easily. I haven't seen as much warping in museum acrylic, but definitely with the lesser grades. It helps to give it room to expand around the edges when you frame. If you choose to frame with glass, paintings over 30 by 40 inches should use a double strength glass. If choosing acrylic for that size, it too should be a thicker version to help compensate for the mass. Now, as mentioned, frames need to work well with the piece of art. Also, if framing with mats, the frame is normally thinner than the mat. A 1 to 2 inch frame is the standard width, but a moderately large painting can often handle a 3-inch frame or a wider mat with a thin frame. And extra large oil paintings, like those seen in some art museums, can handle a 4-inch frame or even larger. Basically, the larger the painting, the larger the frame you can use. But you don't want the frame to be the focus. It should enhance or complement the artwork. I have to mention one exception of putting an extra wide frame on a very small painting, and that gives it almost a more elegant look. It's the exact opposite of the general rule. It's something to keep an eye out for. Now, for contemporary artworks, if you have a very large piece, you may still want a very thin frame. So again, there's so many different ways you can work this. Frames should be selected before a mat, as I mentioned, and should be selected to work with the painting rather than work with a grouping of other frames, according to experts. So I wouldn't worry so much about matching all your frames in a setting. They just shouldn't conflict visually. So what I do is I tend to use a certain gold and a German silver, as well as a black or a charcoal black, and I feel like those colors kind of work together successfully. Now, if you're framing a painting that's extra large, make sure you take appropriate precautions and allow for additional weight. The frame will need to be strong enough to handle the size and the weight, especially if you include glass or acrylic sheet. And the glass or acrylic, as mentioned, should be thicker. There are various types of frames. There's the standard traditional frame, and then there's something called a floater frame, which sits gently next to the art and allows a small space between the art and the frame. It kind of makes it look like the art is floating. Frames should also coordinate with the style of the artwork. A modern painting, as I said, with a traditional gilt frame would probably feel odd unless it was part of the artist's intention. And a traditional landscape oil painting may look a little funny in a shiny metal frame. So basically, try to use a frame that has the same personality as the artwork. Now, frames are usually made of either wood or some form of metal. Metal frames will normally have to be put together by the artist. It's not too hard, actually. It's kind of like putting together a puzzle. Wood frames are normally sold already put together. There are also resin-based frames that mimic wood. It's a less expensive option, but I will warn you that sometimes it's hard to get the screws and the hardware into the frame. It's cheaper, but you might have that difficulty. After you put together your chosen frame and materials, in some cases, you'll need to cover the back with some kind of dust cover. It's usually a good precaution in order to further protect the painting from the elements. This is most important when framing works on paper, and it's often a piece of acid-free craft paper or one of the more archival acid-free backing papers by Lenico or Tyvek. The dust cover doesn't normally touch the artwork, so it doesn't have to be quite as archival, but I personally prefer to err on the side of longevity. By using a dust cover, you're completing the microclimate that we're creating, or protected space for your painting. Amazingly, though, over a series of years, dust may still miraculously get in there. So someday you may have to open it up for cleaning, but hopefully not. It does give your painting a very finished appearance, though, so it's normally recommended. Some artists use a dust cover on the back of a painting framed without glazing as well, such as an oil painting. It's not a hard and fast rule. Some experts even recommend placing a piece of foam board or other backing material to provide an additional barrier from moisture and dust. But cured oil paintings seem to do fairly well without any kind of backing board as well. It's just something to consider. Now, when framing, there are several adhesives that you're going to need to use in the framing process. You'll need something to hold the artwork in place if framing with a mat. You'll need something to hold the mat and the mounting board together when you're sandwiching the artwork. You may want to use foam adhesive along the edge of your frame, the rabbit, if you remember, if it's made of wood, in order to prevent the acid from leaching. And you'll need adhesive to attach the dust cover to the back of your frame. There are many options for adhesives, but let me show you the most common products used for each purpose. To hold your artwork in place, the two primary options are linen hinge tape and mounting corners. To connect the mounting board and the mat board, linen hinge tape is commonly used. To protect the artwork from the wooden frame along the rabbit, as we talked about, there are special products called either foam rabbit tape or frame sealing tape. Now, you don't have to use one of these, but it is useful for preserving your artwork from the acids in the wood. The foam tape also acts as a cushion, as we mentioned. And finally, to adhere the dust cover, you can simply use an acid-free double-sided tape, such as Scotch Brand, or the more official adhesive transfer tape. It's also known as ATG. You will most likely need picture hanging wire when framing your work. You can hang your work from what are called D-rings, but most shows ask for wired paintings, and it's convenient for clients as well. To me, it's a little easier to hang work with a wire. Picture wire is usually made of galvanized steel, meaning it's coated with a thin layer of zinc to prevent, or at least slow, the rusting process. But it will eventually rust, and it'll need replacing. So I personally prefer the kind that's coated with plastic or vinyl, as it should last a lot longer. And I find also that I get scratched less when wiring the back. There is wire that's made of pure nylon, but I've never worked with that personally. I'm not sure I'd like its workability. When securing a canvas or panel inside a wooden frame, you will also need offset clips. These are special metal clips, as you see here, that when they're secured with a screw, holds the artwork safely in place. I'll show you how it works in a later lecture. One final note. When I frame a painting, I like to lay down what is actually an exercise mat in order to protect the frame from damage. It works really well, and it keeps the frame in place while I work. In the next lecture, we'll discuss framing by painting medium.